Hey everyone, welcome back to another YouTube video by SmartPath Tutoring. This video is on power and conflict poetry. On Poppies. Poppies by Jane Weir. The poem in a nutshell. The context is that it's written by Jane Weir in 2005. Weir is a contemporary poet and textile designer who was commissioned by Carol Ann Duffy to provide a modern perspective on the human cost of conflict. Unlike the soldier poets of World War I, Weir writes from the perspective of a mother, focusing on the domestic impact of war and the universal experience of maternal grief. The plot. The poem begins with the mother pinning a poppy onto her son's uniform as he prepares to leave for the army. She struggles to maintain her composure, fussing over cat hairs and his collar. The narrative then jumps forward in time. The son is gone, implied to be killed in action, and the mother is shown visiting a war monument, desperately tracing his name and listening for his voice on the wind. Main message. War doesn't just happen on the battlefield, it happens at home. The poem explores the internal conflict of a parent who must balance their desire to protect their child with the need to let them grow and go to war. It suggests that grief is a bravery in itself, requiring the mother to steel her surface against the pain. Key symbolism. The textile imagery, crimped, bias binding, and pleats, reflects the mother's attempt to stay tailored and controlled while her emotions are fraying. The dove symbolizes both peace and the son's departed soul, while the war memorial acts as a cold physical barrier between the living and the dead. The gelled blackthorns of his hair represents both a modern hairstyle and the crown of thorns, hinting at the son's sacrifice. Key ideas. The domestic reality of war. Unlike traditional war poetry, the battlefield here is the home. The mother's struggle with crimped petals and cat hairs shows that for those left behind, war is felt in the small everyday details. The world overflowing like a treasure chest suggests that while the son sees adventure, the mother sees only the vast, dangerous space he has entered. The psychological toll of grief. The mother's internal conflict is shown through her physical restraint. She has to steel her face and resist the urge to run my fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair. Her grazed heart suggests that her pain is an open wound, and her wandering without a winter coat or reinforcements at the end shows her emotional vulnerability and lack of protection against her loss. The blur of childhood and adulthood. The poem constantly shifts between the son as a boy and the son as a soldier. By mixing images of playgrounds and nursery rhymes with war memorials, Weir shows how a parent never stops seeing their child as someone to protect. The bravery mentioned isn't just the son's, it's the mother's bravery in letting him walk away into adulthood and danger. The symbolism of freedom and loss. The individual war graves and the memorial represent the cold, permanent reality of death. The single dove flying from a pear tree acts as a symbol of the son's spirit or his desire for freedom. But for the mother, it leads only to a wishbone, a symbol of fragile hope, as she leans against the wall, waiting to hear his playground voice on the wind. Structure of the poem. 4 stanzas of unequal length. Unlike the rigid quintets of exposure, this irregular structure reflects the mother's unraveling emotions. The varying stanza lengths suggest her thoughts are disorganized and fluctuating as she struggles to maintain her composure. Free verse and lack of rhyme scheme. The absence of a formal rhyme or rhythm creates a natural conversational tone. This reflects a domestic, private memory rather than a formal war poem, making the mother's grief feel more personal and raw. Enjambment and caesura. Lines frequently overflow into one another, rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting, representing the mother's memories breaking through her disciplined exterior. The breaks or caesures in the middle of lines show her physically catching her breath as she tries to steal her surface. Shifting time frames. Anachrony. The poem moves fluidly between 3 days before, the son leaving, and the present, the mother at the memorial. This structure emphasizes that for the grieving, time is not linear. She is trapped between the memory of his childhood and the reality of his death. Context of the poem. The human cost of war. Ware wrote the poem to focus on the domestic side of conflict. While most war poetry focuses on the soldiers, Poppies highlights the suffering of those left behind, illustrating that war creates victims far away from the actual battlefield. Textile background. As a textile designer, Ware uses fabric metaphors, crimped, bias binding, felt, to describe emotional states. This suggests that the mother is trying to sew her life back together, or stitch her emotions into a controlled, tidy shape. Modern conflict. Written in 2005, the poem reflects the modern wars, unlike those in Iraq or Afghanistan. Unlike the collective we of the trenches in exposure, this poem focuses on the individual experience of loss, reflecting how modern society progresses grief through private acts of remembrance. Commissioned for remembrance. The poem was part of a collection commissioned by Carol Ann Duffy to mark the impact of war, Ware's perspective as a mother provides a female voice to the war narrative, countering the male-dominated tradition of war poetry and focusing on the quiet bravery of staying behind. Poppies' poem. 3 days before Armistice Sunday, and poppies had already been placed on individual war graves. Before you left, I pinned one onto your lapel, crimped petals, spasms of paper red, disrupting a blockade of yellow bias binding around your blazer. Sellotape bandaged around my hand. I rounded up as many white cat hairs as I could, smoothed down your shirts, unturned collars, steeled the softening of my face. I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose, play at being Eskimos like we did when you were little. I resisted the impulse to run my fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair. All the words flattened, rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting. I was brave as I walked with you to the front door, threw it open to the world overflowing like a treasure chest. A split second and you were away, intoxicated. After you'd gone, I went into your bedroom, realized a songbird came from its cage. Later, a single dove flew from the pear tree, and this is where it has led me. Skirting the churchyard walls, my stomach busy, making tucks, darts, pleats, hatless, without a winter coat or reinforcements of scarves, gloves. On reaching the top of the hill, I traced the inscriptions on the wall memorial, leaned against it like a wishbone. The dove pulled freely against the sky, an ornamental stitch. I listened, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. Line by line analysis. 3 days before Armistice Sunday. The method is the temporal marker or illusion. The analysis of this is that it sets a somber tone immediately. It links the private family moment to a national day of mourning, suggesting the son's story is one of many. The next quote is, and poppies had already been placed on individual war graves. The method of this is symbolism and enjambment. The analysis of this is the poppies symbolize death and sacrifice. Individual emphasizes that while war is a mass event, Every loss is a personal tragedy for a family. The next one is before you left, I pinned one onto your lapel. This method is personal pronoun of you. Analysis. This creates a direct address, dramatic monologue, making the poem feel like a private conversation with a son who is no longer there to answer. The next one is crimped petals, spasms of red paper. The method of this is metaphor or violent imagery. The analysis of this is spasms suggests the physical pain of dying or a bodily reaction to injury. Crimped implies something fragile and easily crushed. Disrupting a blockade of yellow bias binding. The method of this is military metaphor. Blockade. Textile imagery. The analysis of this is that she uses war language to describe domestic items. A blockade suggests she is trying to keep her emotions in or shut the world out. The next one is sellotape bandaged around my hand. The method of this is metaphor and lexical field of surgery or injury. The analysis of this is the mother's is literally cleaning his coat, but the word bandaged implies she is the one who is wounded and needs healing. I rounded up as many white cat hairs as I could. The method of this is domestic imagery. The analysis of this quote is a mundane, motherly act that contrasts sharply with the blackthorns and blockades of war. It shows her desire to care for him. Sealed the softening of my face. The method of this is sibilance or juxtaposition. The analysis of it is the word steeled sounds hard and metallic like a soldier, while softening shows her maternal instinct to cry. She is forcing herself to be brave. The next one is, I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose. The method of this is animalistic imagery or sensory language. The analysis is that it suggests a primal motherly bond. It highlights her desperate need for physical closeness before he disappears. The next one is play at being Eskimos like we do when you were little. The method of this is nostalgia or anecdote. The analysis is that she is regressing to his childhood to avoid the reality of his adulthood. It emphasizes the tragedy to her he is still a child. Run my fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair. The method here is metaphor and religious allusion. The analysis is blackthorns alludes to the crown of thorns worn by Jesus, suggesting the Son is a sacrificial figure dying for a greater cause. All my words flattened, rolled, turned into felt. The method here is rule of 3, or textile metaphor. The analysis is as wool is compressed to make felt, her emotions are crushed together until she is unable to speak. She is literally speechless with grief. Slowly melting, I was brave as I walked with you to the front door. The method of this is enjambment or subversion of bravery. The analysis is usually soldiers are called brave, where suggests that the parent who lets their child go is the one showing true courage. The next one is through it open, the world overflowing, like a treasure chest. The method here is simile or enjambment. The analysis to the sun, the world, and war is an exciting treasure to be explored. To the mother, the overflowing world is chaotic and dangerous. A split second and you were away. intoxicated. Method is word choice and adjective. The analysis of this is the word intoxicated suggests the son is drunk on the glamour of uniform and patriotism, blinded to the reality of death. The next one is released a song bird from its cage. The method here is symbolism and metaphor. The analysis represents the mother finally allowing herself to cry, or perhaps the release of her son's soul from his body. Skirting the church yard walls, my stomach busy making tucks, darts, pleats. The method here is a synthetic list or textile lexis. The analysis is her anxiety is described through the physical act of sewing. Busy suggests her grief is an active, restless force. Without a winter coat or reinforcements of scarf, gloves. The method here is military metaphor, reinforcements. The analysis is that she is emotionally unprotected. She has no armor against the cold reality of her son's death. I traced the inscriptions on the war memorial. The method here is the tactile imagery. The analysis is that she is looking for a physical connection to him. Touching the stone is the only way she can touch her son now. Leaned against it like a wishbone. The method here is simile. The analysis of this is a wishbone is fragile and easily snapped, symbolizing her mental state. It also suggests she is wishing for his return. Another one is an ornamental stitch. I listened, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. Method here is auditory imagery or cyclic structure. The analysis is the poem ends where it began, with childhood. The playground voice reminds the reader that every fallen soldier was once a child, leaving the mother eternally waiting. Section analysis. Lines 1 to 6. The ritual of remembrance. What happens? The mother prepares her son to leave, pinning a poppy on his blazer. The poem is set around Armistice Sunday, grounding the personal moment in a wider context of national mourning. The effect or meaning of this is the crimped and spasms of the poppies suggest that even the symbols of peace are tinged with violence and pain. The domestic act of fixing a uniform becomes a blockade, showing the mother's attempt to wall off her emotions and stay composed. Techniques to highlight here are the military lexis, blockade, and armistice, tactile imagery such as crimped. Lines 7 to 18. The physical struggle. What happens? The mother uses sellotape to clean white cat hairs off her son's uniform. She describes the urge to touch him and play Esquimus, like they did when he was a child, but she resists. The effect or meaning of this is that it highlights the domestic reality of war. The mother is grieving for the child he was, even as he prepares to be the soldier he has become. Her steeled face shows she is adopting a soldier's toughness, just to survive the mourning of his departure. Techniques to highlight is the metaphor, gelled blackthorns, bandaged, juxtaposition, steeled versus softening. Lines 19 to 24. The departure. What happens? She walks him to the front door and opens it to the world. He leaves, seemingly excited and intoxicated by the prospect of adventure, while she remains behind, feeling the loss immediately. Effect and meaning. The treasure chest, simile, reflects the son's naive perspective. He sees glory and adventure, while the mother sees a dangerous void that is taking him away. Her bravery is the act of letting him go into a world she can no longer protect him from. Techniques to highlight here is the simile, like a treasure chest. Symbolic gesture, released a song bird. Lines 25 to 35. The final vigil. What happens in the present day? The mother walks to a war memorial. She traces his name in the stone and leaves against it, listening to the wind and hoping to hear his playground voice. The effect or meaning of this is that the poem finds on a note of permanent loss. The shifting time frames show that her grief has made time feel circular. She is forever trapped between the memory of his childhood and the cold reality of the memorial. The wishbone simile shows she is fragile and broken by the pity of war. Techniques to highlight is the visual imagery or war memorial, auditory imagery, playground voice, and simile like a wishbone. Overall interpretation. Jane Weir's Poppies explores the profound disconnect between the public act of remembrance and the private domestic agony of a mother left behind by conflict. Through a fluid, shifting structure and the use of textile-based metaphors, the poem depicts the mother as a brave figure who bears the psychological burden of steeling herself against grief while her son is intoxicated by the patriotic myth of adventure. The poem suggests that war leaves a permanent grazed wound on the family unit, transforming mundane objects like cat hairs and sellotape into symbols of a life that has been turned into felt, compressed, and irreversibly changed by loss. By the end, the mother's pilgrimage to the war memorial feels a bitter truth, that the individual tragedy of war is an enduring quiet suffering that exists long after the armistice is signed. The wishbone fragility of her hope confirms domesticity, and grief is a battlefield of its own, leaving the mother in a state of permanent longing, listening for a playground voice that has been silenced by the blackthorns of war, showing that the true cost of conflict is paid by the tucks, darts, and pleats of a mother's broken heart. Comparison checklist for essays. Poppies. The internal battle. Unlike the physical knives of wind in exposure, the conflict in Poppies is internal. The mother steels her face like a soldier, showing that the emotional struggle at home is as demanding as the physical struggle at the front. Domesticity as a minefield. The contrast between the treasure chest of the world and blackthorns of the son's hair. Ordinary household items such as sellotape, cat hairs, scissors become symbols of trauma and the pity of war. Fragility and rigidity. While exposure uses a rigid structure to show a static nightmare, Poppies uses irregular stances and enjambment to show fluid grief. The mother is like a wishbone, fragile and ready to snap, contrasting with the inscribed permanence of the war memorial. The loss of voice. In exposure, the men whisper and mumble. In Poppies, the mother's words are flattened, rolled, turned into felt. Both poems explore how the trauma of war renders the individual silent and unable to communicate their pain. The universal sacrifice. The playground voice at the end shows that every soldier is someone's child. Comparison with Poppies. Comparison with Ozymandias, Poppies, similarities, the fragility of power. Both poems explore the temporary nature of human life and structures. In Ozymandias, the sneer of cold command is erased by the desert. In Poppies, the intoxicated pride of the soldier is replaced by a cold war memorial, proving that the glory of the state leads to an individual's downfall. The silence of the subject. Both poets use silence to emphasize loss. The shattered visage of Ozymandias cannot speak of his works, just as the sun in Poppies is reduced to a playground voice on the wind. The blank sound of Shelley's poem mirrors the blank absence of the mother's field. feels. The use of irony. Irony exposes the ruler's foolishness in both texts. The King of Kings expects his legacy to last forever, but it's a colossal wreck. Just as the military blockade and reinforcements mentioned in Poppies are useless against the actual enemy, the grief and grazed heart of those left behind. Differences. Public versus private legacy. Ozymandias focuses on the public failure of a tyrant to achieve immortality through stone. Poppies focuses on the private failure of a family to protect its own, showing that the real memorial isn't a statue, but the tucks, darts, and pleats of a mother's internal pain. Historical versus contemporary. Shelley's poem is a distant historical critique of ancient autocracy. Ware's poem is a modern, immediate exploration of domesticity, focusing on the individual human cost of modern warfare rather than the fall of an empire. The source of power. In Ozymandias, power comes from authority, and ego, the hand that mocked them. In Poppies, the power comes from a memory and love which pulls freely, like the doves against the sky, surviving long after the inscriptions on the stone have faded. Comparison with the war photographer. Poppies. Similarities include the isolated witness. Both poems focus on an individual who is physically safe but psychologically haunted. In War Photographer, the protagonist is his dark room with ordered rows of film. In Poppies, the mother is at home skirting the churchyard walls. Both are trapped in their memories of a conflict they didn't fight in. The struggle for emotional control. Both characters use order to try and contain their chaos. The photographer sets out his films in ordered rows like a cemetery. The mother uses textile, tucks, darts, and pleats, and steals her face. This shows that the pity of war forces survivors to repress their emotions just to function. The indifference of the world. Both poems end with a sense of isolation. In War Photographer, the public do not care. In Poppies, the sun has been taken by a world overflowing like a treasure chest that doesn't care about the mother's grazed heart. This proves that the individual's suffering is often invisible to society. Differences include the professional versus personal. The photographer is a witness doing a job. His trauma is occupational. The mother is a victim of a personal loss. Her trauma is maternal. This makes the tone of Poppies feel more tender and intimate, while the War Photographer feels more clinical and bitter. Physical and emotional distance. In War Photographer, the conflict is physically far away. Belfast, Beirut. In Poppies, the battlefield has moved into the home. The front door and the bedroom are the places where the conflict is most painfully felt. The outcome of the imagery. Duffy uses religious and funeral imagery, a priest preparing to intone a mass, to suggest a solemn ritualistic mourning. Ware uses textile and childhood imagery, Eskimos nursery rhymes, to suggest a loss of innocence and the domestic chivalling of a family. Key quotes to revise for Poppies. Spasms of paper red, disrupting a blockade of yellow bias binding. This is a metaphor and military lexis. Spasms links to the poppy to the physical twitching of a dying body. The blockade shows the mother is trying to wall off her emotions, proving that the domestic space has become a psychological battlefield. Steeled the softening of my face. Sibilance and juxtaposition. The S sound create a cold, hard tone, steeled, metallic, soldiery versus softening, maternal and grief. Shows her internal conflict, suggesting she must adopt a soldier's toughness just to survive the departure. Run my fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair. metaphors and religious allusion. Blackthorns refers to a modern hairstyle, but also Christ's crown of thorns. This hints at the son's sacrifice and the pity of war, showing the mother already views him as a sacrificial figure. The world overflowing, like a treasure chest, smile and enjambment. The world looks like an adventure to the intoxicated son, but the overflowing suggests a lack of control. This proves that irony exposes the ruler's foolishness. The son sees treasure, while the mother sees a void that will swallow him. Leaned against it like a wishbone. I listened hoping to hear your playground voice. Smile, simile and auditory imagery. A wishbone is fragile and easily snapped, representing the mother's broken state. The playground voice emphasizes that for the parent, the soldier is always a child, making the loss permanent and personal. That's the end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe.